Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Once again from my home, I wish you Shabbat Shalom, and it's a pleasure and an honor to be virtually in your homes with you. Good news, of course, this week on the vaccine and treatment fronts. So while we may be doing this for a while, it looks like we will be out of this situation. And boy, will we have a lot of work to do to rebuild our lives and economy and straighten out all of the social justice issues that have become so apparent. But even knowing that we have work to do, we also have Shabbat to celebrate, and we will begin tonight with Lecha Dodi.
Lecha Dodi likrat kala, b'nei Shabbat nekabla. 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 Likrat Shabbat lechu v'nelcha, ki et habracha היא מביאה בשמחה ברינה ובצהלה, ב'nei Shabbat nekabla. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, b'nei Shabbat nekabla. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, b'nei Shabbat nekabla.
I ask Arthur to now, as we hear our blessing over the candles, to light our Shabbat lights, and we'll say L'chaim.
Baruch ha'or ba'olam, Baruch ha'or ba'adam, Baruch ha'or b'shalom, b'shalom, Baruch ha'or, Baruch ha'or, b'Shabbat.
If you have a glass of cheer, I invite you to raise yours with mine as we say to each other, L'chaim, to life. Continue with our reading. There are times when we seek things for ourselves and measure failure by what we do not gain. When we celebrate Shabbat, we seek not to acquire, but to share. There are times when we exploit nature as if it were a horn of plenty that can never be exhausted. When we celebrate Shabbat, we pause in awe before the majesty of the universe. There are times when we act as if we cared nothing for others. When we celebrate Shabbat, we remember that sharing and caring and bringing justice and fairness can make our world a better place. Let us embrace this moment in time when we celebrate Shabbat. It is a time of rest, of wonder, of peace. We continue with Ma Tovu, our special version from our congregation.
Ma tovu alecha Yaakov, o alecha Yaakov, mishkenotecha Yisrael. Ma tovu alecha Yaakov, o alecha Yaakov, Yisrael. Ma tovu alecha Yaakov, alecha Yaakov, mishkenotecha Israel.
Tonight, we'll be talking about science education, so several of our readings have that theme as well. This one, a new one that I discovered from a writer named Herbert Levine. From Einstein and his students, I learned that the elements in me were forged in the same furnace as the stars. From other great ones, I've learned to sit, to breathe, pay attention with watchful eyes to a world filled with glory and wonders, like me, like you, and like the stars.
Tikvati, tikvati bi, evo kochi, kochi bi, vegam bach, evo kochi, kochi bi, vegam bach. Where is my light? My light is in me. Where is my hope? My hope is in me. Where is my strength? My strength is in me and in you, and in you. Where is my strength? My strength is in me and in you, and in you.
Tonight, we are going to share with you a special conversation that I had earlier in the week with Kaylee Fisher. For those of you who are active in our congregation, you will certainly recognize her last name. She grew up there. She is the daughter of our wonderful executive director, Anne Marie Fisher. She is a scholar, a PhD candidate in etymology at the University of California, Riverside. She holds a BS in ecology and evolutionary biology, a master's in science and conservation ecology, both from the University of Michigan. And it's my pleasure to share with you tonight this conversation that she and I held about the importance of science education, particularly in these days. Kaylee Fisher, Shabbat Shalom, thank you so much for joining us tonight. You are, of course, a member of our congregation going back to your childhood, and your mom is our executive director, so your family. And the last time I think I got to see you in person was when we were naming your daughter Rafi on a Friday night, and I know she's been scurrying around there as we've been talking before the interview. Just to get us started tonight, our topic is science education. Which leads a little bit into the denialism and the mistrust of science that we're having. So maybe a good place to start is to talk about the state of science education in our country right now.
Okay, thank you so much for having me. Shabbat Shalom. So my experience with science education is obviously my own. So I've spent a lot of my life learning about science. And I've also experienced science education as an educator at the college level. So I've taught college students before. And obviously we know that education is kind of being, like, funding for education has been cut quite a bit, and it's kind of been going in that direction for a long time. But even with science, and I think one of the issues too, though, is just how we teach everyone science. So we kind of present science as these facts, right? You learn when you're in high school or something, you learn about mitosis or something, and you're supposed to memorize all of the steps in mitosis. But I think a gap that we really miss as science educators is that science really isn't facts. It's a process of understanding how the world works and finding truth. And that process is continuous. It just keeps going, right? So it's kind of inaccurate to say that this is a fact, because we're not really being transparent about the process that led us to be confident in those facts, right? So that's how we kind of teach science. We teach it by having students memorize these facts and these ideas, and we tell them to trust us that, like, yes, this is true. When really, I think we should put more of an emphasis on the process of science. How are we so confident in those facts? And that's really about teaching students how to think critically and be able to get a lot of different kinds of information and come to some conclusion about it, and give them the tools to go through that information and figure out what they can trust and what they can't trust, right? And that's a huge issue that we have right now. We have people saying that they know what's going on, and we believe them or trust them when they don't really have the expertise to say those things, and they also weren't using the process of science to come to those conclusions. And we can't really call them out because we don't really teach people what the process of science is to get to those conclusions. So, and I think so with science education, it's about how we're educating people in this country, but also it's about how scientists are communicating science, right? So we need to be more transparent as scientists into how we are coming to the conclusions that we give to the public, right? So that's really clear with the coronavirus response, right? And the masks, like the big thing is that, oh, well, they told us that masks don't do anything at the beginning, and now they're telling us to do it. Why should we trust them? And the reason I think that we're getting that response is because we are interpreting when a scientist says something as a fact. When it's not a fact, it's the best information we have at the time given what we have, right? And when you understand that that's part of a process, you understand that those facts, they're not really facts, it's just information that we keep getting new and new information, then we're putting it together and interpreting it in a different way given all of the information we have at the current time. So then think about it like that, and when we teach students like that, then and they comprehend that process a little bit better, you're not as deceived when you realize that they said something that was inconsistent with something that they said later.
The lack of trust in scientific guidance is being cited as probably the number one reason that we're failing at controlling this virus in the country right now. The president obviously has not put the full faith in his scientific advisors and is questioning their credibility. Yesterday, he tweeted a game show host about the fact that nobody knows anything and we shouldn't trust anyone. What is the factor that trust plays in science and listening to science? How much of a problem in the breakdown in trust is related to the poor science education that we're providing?
Yeah, I think that's a critical factor in where we are right now, is just trusting the scientists. And I think it goes back to us not being transparent about the process of how we come to those conclusions in the first place. We don't teach those really in K-3. We don't even do that great of a job in college. As somebody who went to college for science, like I would say that I didn't really understand the process until I got to graduate school, and I'm not really sure why we're so bad at teaching it. But I think, and I mean, I don't know if we taught the process better in how we come to these conclusions, maybe there would still be distrust. But I think at least then people would be able to use their own critical thinking skills that they taught in science education to kind of be better prepared to decide whether the president is telling the truth or not, and to trust scientists. So I think it really does. I think it's deceiving when we present it as facts because they change. And then why would I trust somebody who told me one thing and then tells me something else if I'm not understanding the process and they're not being transparent about why they got to those different conclusions at different time points?
And yet there are some things that we know. We know, for instance, that evolution is how life
developed on this planet. We know that gravity exists, that the Earth is not at the center of the universe. And those are things that we do want our kids to understand, that are, at least with all the best information that we can imagine ever getting, are facts and evidence. What makes something like the coronavirus so different than speaking, for instance, about gravity or the other kinds of things I talked about?
Yeah, for sure. So those things, and again, and we could teach them evolution. Yes, like there is a tremendous amount of scientific evidence that supports evolution, right? If you go and look into all of the experiments people have done since evolution became an idea, it has constantly demonstrated that it is what is happening, right? Mm-hmm. The idea of evolution was proposed in the 1800s, right? So we've had 170 years of experiments demonstrating in providing evidence that it's true. The coronavirus we found out about in December of 2019. We haven't done that many experiments on it. Scientists don't understand it very well, right? So when we compare evolution to something like the coronavirus, given that evolution is kind of a process too, right? We're presenting to the public science at different stages of understanding it. So evolution, we have we've been studying it for 170 years, give or more than that, 200 years. In coronavirus, we've been studying since December. So when they first started talking about it, they were comparing it to other types of coronaviruses, right? There have been other coronaviruses that have created epidemics like SARS and MERS, right? So we were, this is the best information we know about it because this is a new one. So we're going to compare it to the other ones and maybe it'll be similar. And it wasn't that similar, right? The new one, the novel coronavirus, is behaving differently than the other ones. So at the time when scientists said, well, we should compare it to the other ones, right? That was the best information they had at the time. And that was pretty reasonable, right? Now we know more because we have more studies that have taken place. We have more data showing how it's behaving. So they had to change their interpretation of what's going on. And scientists, that's what we do. We're trying to understand the world given all of the information we have at the time. So that information's constantly going to increase, and that might change how we're interpreting it.
This lack of sureness that people point to with science, and particularly now that it's affecting everybody's health and the economy and everything, Americans and people in general, I suppose, we don't seem to like dealing with uncertainty. I guess nobody really likes that, but how is uncertainty? How does this contribute to the scientific method? What is the role of uncertainty?
Well, I think that's really at the crux of science, right? Is we don't know everything and we aren't going to know everything. We have a process that we use to try to understand the world. And there is uncertainty in that process. We can't know everything. If we knew everything, science wouldn't exist because we wouldn't need to because we already knew everything. So I think as scientists, we need to be more transparent about that process. And I think we kind of present science as this like objective thing, right? But it's not objective. It's not. There's parts of it that are, and there's parts of it that aren't. And so like we can talk about the process if it's okay. Like when you try to understand something as a scientist, you have a question or you have a hypothesis that you want to test, you want to see if it's true or not, right? And when we come to some idea in science that we all agree on, like evolution, right? That was after hundreds and hundreds of experiments that were showing, yes, like this is what's going on. But fundamentally, like with the coronavirus, we didn't know what was starting. We had a question, like what's going on? How is this going to infect people, right? So you gather data. That question is not objective, right? I mean, it's informed by humans and what we think and our experience. So it's not an objective thing, right? I mean, it's partly subjective based on who's asking it and who's testing it. When you gather data, that data should be objective, right? Like I'm not going to try to influence the data that I collect. And we're seeing that in our country too, and it's not going well, right? I mean, they're trying to manipulate data. That's not okay. And hopefully our process for understanding things in the scientific community is not perfect, but we hope that it's robust enough that if somebody does do that, we will figure it out and say, like, no, we can't trust this person and how they collected their data because they didn't do it objectively. And the way that we do it is by repeating how their experiments and things like that, embedding them. And then once you have this data, you want to interpret the data, right? And that's kind of subjective too. It's based on the person who's doing it. And it should be, because you want the person who's interpreting that data to be an expert. You want them to have a lot of knowledge and a lot of background in order to be able to put that data into the context of what we know already, right? So I think that anybody could potentially do it, but they need to be trained in how to do it, right? I mean, that's why I've been in school for 10 years, like, and I'm still in school, right? I mean, scientists spend a lot of time learning how to do these things so that we can have more confidence in the science that we're presenting to the public, right? And I mean, there's always going to be uncertainty, but we try to check each other by, when I present science, other experts vet my science before I present it to the public. And that's a huge thing, right? I mean, when I do an experiment and I write up my experiment after I collect my data and I interpret it, I write it up. And before I can publish it, other experts in the field have to go through it and make sure that I did it correctly, right? And that's a huge process. It takes a few months actually for that process to happen. So other experts who weren't involved in my experiment have to make sure that I did it correctly before it's published in a scientific journal and given to the public, right? So like, that's like the process. It's not perfect, but that's how we do it. And you can see that that's different than asking somebody what they think, somebody on TV or something, because nobody first of all, they're not experts necessarily, probably not. And then they don't have other experts vetting what they're saying before it's presented to the public.
There seems to be a tendency, and maybe it's not a modern thing, this would be something that even goes back to the history of religion, to expect experts to also be authorities. And to exercise authority is a very different process than to engage expertise. Do you think that this perception of authority versus what goes into expertise may also be a functioning as a motivation for science denialism that we're seeing right now?
Sure, I definitely think so. I definitely think so based on just my own personal experiences and then just what I'm seeing play out in this country. I think that there's maybe even almost an insecurity with this authority in people, and they think that scientists think they're better than them or something like that, and are telling them what to do, which is maybe scientists are partly responsible for that. I don't think it's just people in a rejection of authority and being told what to do. I think it's also about transparency in how we're presenting things and in communicating things, because when we do a science experiment and we interpret it and we present it to the public, it's not like saying, okay, now I'm telling you what to do. We're just giving the best evidence that we have at the time so that we can figure out as a society what to do.
Americans want to be told by an authority what is the right thing to do. And the expertise in science does not necessarily invoke an authoritarian kind of response automatically. You can't operate that way. You just have to make the best decisions, from what I understand you're saying, based on the best data that you have. And this is something that I believe, because of our religious and political pasts as humans, not Americans per se, that I think is very difficult to people. Anything that you want to add before we conclude, that how people should be looking at some of the expertise and the data that's coming at us so constantly from the medical field and others?
I think we also have to ask ourselves, with science and it producing knowledge, and maybe this is just something that the congregation can think about, but I'm a scientist, I produce knowledge, and other scientists do that too. And I think we need to figure out as a society who really owns that knowledge after it's produced. Like, is it the person who produces it? Is it the person who's interpreting it? Is it the person who pays for it to be done? Or people who contribute to it? Or is it owned by who it affects? And is it owned by society at large? Is it owned by some special interests? We need to figure that out as a society, I think.
So I see that your partner, your scientific assistant researcher, has entered the room. Hi, Rafi, and just in time too. Let me thank you so much for joining us during the service, and wish you Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Good health, and bye, Rafi. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you so much for joining us. Yeah. Kaylee Fisher, Shabbat Shalom. Thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Sorry about that, folks. We had a little bit of a looping there, but it was such a pleasure to get to see Rafi, because I did her naming. I think I mentioned that at the beginning of the interview. This being a service that's dedicated to science and science education, and also, of course, to all the normal themes of Shabbat, there are two readings that I selected tonight from Carl Sagan, whose daughter we heard from, Sasha, when she came to speak to us about our book. About her new book. Those of you who missed that interview, it is posted separately on our Birmingham Temple YouTube page. So we'll continue with the reading. Carl Sagan wrote, "Science is not only compatible with spirituality, it is a profound source of spirituality. When we recognize our place in an immensity of light years and in the passage of ages, when we grasp the intricacy, beauty, and subtlety of life, then that soaring feeling, that sense of elation and humility combined, is surely spiritual. So are our emotions in the presence of great art, or music, or literature, or acts of exemplary, selfless courage, such as those of Mohandas Gandhi or Martin Luther King Jr. The notion that science and spirituality are somehow mutually exclusive does a disservice to both." I usually try to find a song that relates directly to the theme of the reading. Tonight, I just went for a setting, the beautiful tones of Erev Ba, evening is coming.
העדן אוהב במבואות הכפר ועולה העבר משבילי עפר והרחק עוצמת ענבלים מלזת משך הצללים
Arthur is going to put up a graphic, a picture that many of you will recognize. On February 14th, 1990, was it really 30 years ago? As the first deep space probe, Voyager 1, left our planetary neighborhood for the fringes of the solar system, engineers turned it around for one last look at its home planet, now 4 billion miles away. And Carl Sagan wrote, "Look at that dot. That's here. That's home. That's us. On it, everyone you love, everyone you know, everyone you ever heard of, every human being who ever was, lived out their lives. The Earth is a very small stage in a vast cosmic arena. Think of the endless cruelties visited by the inhabitants of one corner of this pixel on the scarcely distinguishable inhabitants of some other corner. How frequent their misunderstandings, how eager they are to kill one another, how fervent their hatreds. Think of the rivers of blood spilled by all those generals and emperors so that in glory and triumph they could become the momentary masters of a fraction of a dot. our posturings, our imagined self-importance, the delusion that we have some privileged position in the universe are challenged by this point of pale light. Our planet is a lonely speck in the great enveloping cosmic dark. In our obscurity, in all this vastness, there is no hint that help will come from elsewhere to save us from ourselves. There is perhaps no better demonstration of the folly of human conceits than this distant image of our tiny world. To me, it underscores our responsibility to deal more kindly with one another and to preserve and cherish the pale blue dot, the only home we've ever known. We'll continue now with Na'aseh Shalom.
Na'aseh shalom, shalom ba'olam. Na'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol ha'olam ve'imru shalom. Na'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol ha'olam ve'imru shalom. Na'aseh shalom, shalom ha'olam. Na'aseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol ha'olam ve'imru shalom.
In this community where we find strength and common purpose, we turn our minds and hearts toward all those who need our love and support, those who are ill, those who suffer pain of the body or spirit, those who are lonely, those who have been wronged. Tonight, our well wishes are extended to these members of our community and their loved ones, to Cece Stone, Joan Mann, Patty Becker, Julia Eliason, Arlene Goldberg, Claire Levine, Titus Mendel, Karen Tremper Harris, Robert Liebhaber, Larry Fisher, Jennifer Breen, Anne-Marie Kersniak, and Greg Lowenthal, and Myron Tink. May all who suffer know that they are not alone. May they be healed quickly. May they experience a complete recovery, refuah shlema, the renewal of their bodies and the renewal of their spirits.
Mekom ha'koach betocheinu, Mekorot ha'bracha michevrotenu. May the source of strength that dwells so deep within us help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say Shalom. Mekom ha'koach betocheinu, Mekorot ha'bracha michevrotenu. May those in need of healing know refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say Shalom.
Our thoughts turn to those who are no longer with us, our own loved ones, those whom our friends and neighbors have lost, the martyrs of our people whose graves are unmarked, and those of every people and nation whose lives have been a blessing to humanity. As we remember them, we meditate on the meaning of love and loss, of life and death. We recall now our loved ones whom death has recently taken from us, those who died at this season in years past, and those whom we have taken into our hearts with our own. Tonight, our community continues to mourn the death of Harvey Frank, a beloved member, as we extend our condolences to Esther, his wife, and to his family. Yeh zichro livracha. We also recall now these yahrzeits: Mary Phillips, Roy Kelly III, Ariana Kuffler, Bill Ernst, Joseph Bernard Klein, Alexander Joseph Kozak, Frida Kurland, Sam Kalfin, Sidney Graber, and Hannah Remnick. Yeh zichram livracha. May memories of these people bring us a measure of comfort as we go through life in their absence. Before we conclude with our final song, just a couple of programming notes. We do have, for those of you who are members, another wonderful session of our book group this Sunday at 11 a.m. They'll be taking a look at one of two sessions that they'll be doing, taking a look at the book The Plot Against America by Philip Roth. This first one is the book group's look at it, so it'll be more of a literary analysis. And then, not quite by coincidence, we will also, our film and television group will look at the same story as it was told in the HBO miniseries that aired, or that was posted, I guess, to the internet about 6 months, a year ago. Both of these sessions are led by Dr. Fran Shore, scholar and member of our congregation. So you can find that link at in our newsletter for 11 a.m. on Sunday morning, and members will have received the password in advance. Let us now conclude with a song that is adapted from a Debbie Friedman tune. We call it May We Know Peace.
May we know peace as we go on our way. May we be guided by love. May we be possessed of health and joy. May this be our future. Shalom. 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 May this be our future. Shalom. 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 May this be our future. Shalom. May we feel sheltered by the wings of peace. May we abide in safety and in love. May grace and compassion find their way to everyone. May this be our future. Shalom. 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 May this be our future. Shalom. 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 May this be our future. Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom, everybody. We'll see you soon.